So the original Irish were black people, and even though that history's been whited out, you can still find evidence of it in places. Like, the Irish themselves will call some of them Black Irish. I'm a Murphy. My second name's Murphy. Where
Irish.
did
There
I
you
get
go
that?
again.
Yeah, where did
Yeah.
I get that name from? My dad was from Barbados. Yeah. And if you listen to the Bayesian accent, right, it is pure Irish. It is the Irish accent. Okay. The people who are living in Ireland right now, and I hate me saying this, they're Germans. They're not Irish at all. They're German descendants, because the English are Germans. Yeah, that's the
I
way it is.
yeah, no, no, yeah. Well, there's also, you look at our royal family and the mixed bloodlines, whatever. That's for another day.
Now, if you look at Benjamin Franklin, he wrote an essay back in 1751 called Observations on the Increase of Mankind. And in it, he said that all of Asia is black or tawny, all of Africa is black, all of Europe were black,
Okay.
except for Saxony in Germany, England, and the newcomers in America. He said they're the only white people in the whole world. Okay. So I'm saying that this is the original white bloodline. Okay. Now, Saxony in Germany is very interesting and important because, yeah, there were two types of Saxons. You had the Saxons, the original, and the Anglo-Saxons. Origins of the Anglo-Saxon race. Okay, by I think it's by Thomas Shaw, and on chapter 7 of Origins of the Anglo-Saxon race, chapter 7 is called Our Darker Forefathers, where it talks about their forefathers, the Saxons, who were black. Okay, also indicating that the Anglo-Saxons are white. Okay, so Saxony in Germany is where the Saxons and the Anglo-Saxons came from. So this country in particular, and that's where my research kind of centered on, this country was first colonized by Saxons, right, black and brown people, and then invaded from a place called Jutland now, right? It's I think that's Denmark, right, which was part of Saxony at one point, right? That was the home of the Angles or Anglo-Saxons, right? And so they came over and colonized this place and called this place Angleland, Angel Land, yeah, the land of the fallen angels, right? It was originally Britannia, right? Now, Britannia is a Paleo-Hebrew word. It means land of the covenant, right? Land belonging to the people of the covenant, covenant with the Most High, yeah? So the black and brown people who were here before, right? So the British Isles were black islands, okay? Because
Wow. Yeah.
the original Irish people were black people. And
Wow.
actually, I can show you the progression of where they came from. So there were a people called the Iber. Now, you remember I
Iber.
mentioned Iber, right? I
IBAR.
mentioned, yeah, Iber, right?
Yeah.
Now, I mentioned one of the progenitors was Eber, right? Eber is where you get the word Hebrew from. Iber is just a contraction of the word Hebrew. And you find also the same word in Africa, the Ibu or Igbo, yeah, or the Ivri or the Yebia or the Evre, right? So, for instance, the Ivory Coast doesn't mean it's got tusks. It's the Ivry Coast, right? Which is, I, B's and V, I'm sorry, B, V's and W's are interchangeable, right? Because you've got Germanic people and Canaanite people who can't pronounce certain words. So like Germanics can't pronounce W's, we will kill you, yeah? the Canaanitish, right, the Russian, they can't pronounce V's. So instead of vodka, they say wodka or vodka. Yeah. So B, V's, and W's are kind of interchangeable. So the Iba ended up moving to Spain and Portugal, which they named after themselves, the Iberian Peninsula. Yeah. Some of those people left. Some of those people left there. Okay. So these black Hebrews, yeah, because it's in their name, they left there and they colonized another country, which they named Hibernia. Yeah. Again, after themselves. That's Ireland. Right. Some of those people left from there and colonized a new land, and the only name that survives is Hebrides. Yeah, so Iber, Hibernia, Hebrides. Yeah, you can follow how people move across the landscape because the convention was to name a place after the people. Yeah, what happened was the last black king of the United Kingdom, right, was Charles II, the Black Boy, as he was known. Right, he was deposed, right, and he was replaced by a Germanic white bloodline, right, William of Orange. Okay. Now, when that white bloodline took the throne, they sent their attack dog to exterminate the Irish and the Scottish, Oliver Cromwell. Okay. Now, Oliver Cromwell's task was to literally exterminate the Irish. So he killed as many Irishmen as he could. And those he didn't kill, they transported to their new colony in the Caribbean. Right. So Jamaica and Barbados and a few other places, Montserrat. Okay. So the population of Ireland went down by 40%. Essentially, all the men were gone. Right. So they were either killed or transported to the Caribbean. Okay. So how does a population of black women continue if there's no men? Well, Oliver Cromwell couldn't pay his soldiers. So his soldiers were given lands over in Ireland, right? And if you've seen Braveheart, there's that section in Braveheart where the guy goes, the king says, the trouble with Scotland is it's full of Scots. Well, he actually meant full of blacks, okay? So I'm going to institute an old custom, prima nocta. So whenever a common girl, a black girl, is married, our nobles will have sex with her on the night of her wedding so that the offspring is going to be mixed. Okay. So in Ireland, right, there were no men left. So the offspring were always going to be mixed. So the lighter skin got to stay, the darker skin got transported. Right. So you do that for 300 years. What do you end up with? Right. You end up with a population of white people in Ireland and lighter people going over to the Caribbean, who ended up getting the overseers jobs because they were creating a caste system over there.
Yeah, yeah.
So even though the Irish were white-skinned, they still had the stigma, right? It's called the one drop rule. One drop of Negro blood makes you a Negro. Yeah. So even though they were white-skinned, they still had the stigma of being black. So when they came into England, the English would still regard them as if they were still black. So that's why there's always been an affinity between Irish people and black people. In fact, there's a racial slur in America for a black person it's smoked Irish. So literally the Irish only became white in 1940, right?
Wow.
Until then, they weren't considered white people, right? So, and I've got, there was a book that I found. There was apparently there's only two copies of this book left in this country. When I say this country, I mean England. I ended up going to the British Library to get it out. I ended up in the reading rooms of the British Library laughing my head off, quite rude, because it had proof the book is called Whence the Black Irish of Jamaica. And it was a guy, it was a Reverend, Joseph J. Williams. He was spending time in Africa, and then he went to Jamaica. And he looked around and he said, well, these Jamaicans are very different from the Africans I just left. They've all got these pure Irish names. How did they all get these Irish names? So he looked at the land registry records because he assumed they got their names in slavery. He looked at the land registry records. He couldn't find a single Irish name, which makes sense because these were English colonies. So at the time, they were at a war with Ireland and Scotland. So there won't be any Irish or Scottish landowners, right, at the time. So he couldn't find any of these Irish names. So he went back to England and looked at Oliver Cromwell's records of who he deported. He found all the names. So literally, these black Irish people were transported en masse with their names intact, and that's the proof.
That's so interesting. That's so interesting.
Also some.
Yeah, go on.
There's a ship's manifest that survived from a ship called the Veteran, and it was taking political prisoners or Jacobites. Have you heard that phrase, Jacobites? Yeah. Well, Jacobites, the people of Jacob. So Jacobites were political prisoners who wanted a return of the black bloodline to the throne. So anybody who wanted that were transported, and they would usually be black people. Anyway, in this book, it's called Jacobite Gleanings, right? It's a ship's manifest from the book, from the ship, the Veteran. And in it literally has the cargo, which are prisoners. And it describes, gives you all their names, a physical description and what they did, and what their jobs were. So you'll find among all these names, English and Irish names, right, and some Scottish names, right, but they were described as black people, very dark, very black. And this one's a carpenter, this one was a poet, this one was, and so on and so on.
Yeah.
But all this information's been hidden. Anyway, sorry. This is an essay from Benjamin Franklin, 1751. And I'm reading the highlighted section. It says, which leads me to add one remark, that the number of purely white people in the world is proportionably very small. All Africa is black or tawny, Asia chiefly tawny, America, exclusive of the newcomers, wholly so. And in Europe, the Spaniards, Italians, French, Russians, and Swedes are generally of what we call a swarthy black complexion, as are the Germans also. The Saxons, and by this it means Anglo-Saxons, the Saxons only excepted, who with the English make up the principal body of white people on the face of the earth. Now, 1751, he's talking about a very small number of this one particular bloodline of people, right? And just to give it show you what he's actually saying, this is it. This is all the white people on earth in 1751, okay? So we're not talking about everybody, right? We're talking about this elite group of people who today would be the ones who are running the banks and running the world, essentially. So the Nephilim bloodlines. Of course, we don't know who they are. I've just got people's faces here, but we don't actually know who they are. But this is one of the bloodlines. Okay. Interestingly, if you notice, in this is like 3 ages of the Queen. Black-haired, grey-haired, and silver-haired. Yeah, but she's always wearing this medallion, this big medal here. Can you see it?
Yeah.
On all 3 pictures. If you look closely at that medallion, it's got a white fallen angel treading on the head of a black man, and that's supposed to be a chain. If you see that what looks like a stick in his hand, it's supposed to be a chain.
Yeah.
Okay, and the words in Latin around it is the promise of a better age to come. Combine that with that picture, yeah, now that's the better age, when that fallen angel bloodline finally subdue the line of Adam. Okay, yeah, one big happy family. I'm looking for a particular so if you watched Harry Potter, right, you'll notice that there's an elite class of wizards, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed ones, okay? And they look down on all the other wizards and they call them mudbloods, dirty blood, yeah? So let me see. So what I'm saying here is that we've got 5 groups of people here on Earth, right? We have Neanderthals, right, and descendants of Neanderthals, and that without doubt they're still around, right? They're still around. We've got man, the bloodline of Adam. We've got Nephilim, right, the Nephilim bloodlines, and I think I've done a show on. I think I've mentioned this in another talks, but we've got clones here, okay? So very quickly, about 100 years ago, there was this phenomenon of incubator babies. All of a sudden, babies appeared out of nowhere, no explanation for them, just hundreds of thousands of these babies, okay? Later on, these babies became orphans, right? And these orphans were transported all across the world to populate towns and cities all over the world, okay? Because it not only happened in America, happened in England, sort of the Charles Dickens era, all the chimney sweeps and the children doing all adult jobs. And it also happened in Russia, okay? Now, the first incubator babies appeared in 1893 at the Chicago World's Fair. 1891, there was a guy called Hans Driesch who invented cloning. So I'm positing that, in 1893, they started cloning humans, okay? And because, these orphans, there were no black orphans, yeah? They just, hundreds of thousands of these white orphans were now transported over the world. So it went from 1751 with a very small number of white people in the world to less than 100 years later, millions and millions of them all over the world. With no intervention, no mass immigration, right, the Western countries are going to disappear anyway. I've got a video, I think I mentioned it last time, of an MEP basically saying that the biggest issue we should be looking at is the fact that our populations are decimated, right? They've actually collapsed, right? He actually said they have collapsed. There's nothing we can do about it, right? Demographic collapse has happened. So literally, to keep a population just stable, you need 2.1 children per woman, okay? Just to keep the population stable. As soon as you go under that, you're now in an exponential decline, yeah? And you get to a point where mathematically there's no way of coming back, okay? So most people don't understand what an exponential decline looks like. So I have an example. If you imagine you have a jar of jelly beans, yeah? And there's 1,024 jelly beans in that jar, okay? And the first day you go to that jar and you take 1 jelly bean out, right? Next day you double it, you take 2. Next day you double it again, take 4, right? How long do you think before that jar will be empty? How many days?
Yeah.
Have a guess.
Not many.
It turns out to be 10. 10 days, that jar will be empty. What day do you think will it be when that jar is half full?
Yeah.
What do you reckon?
Oh, I don't know, 8.
Actually, it's day 9.
Oh, I was near then.
Yeah,
yeah,
because if you think about it, if you're doubling each time
yeah,
on day
yeah,
9, half the jar, and that's what you'll take the next day.
yeah.
Yeah.
And most
The
people would say
point
5
is,
because it's halfway through. But obviously, if you think, yes, no, I
yeah.
understand what you're saying totally.
So what it looks like is, right, for most of the time you don't see the decline, and then all of a sudden you drop off a cliff. Right. That's only a decline of a decline of 2. Yeah, because you're doubling each time.
Mm-hmm.
In some cases the decline is much more than that. Yeah. You've got 2 countries I think are going to be the first to go, Italy and Japan. Right. Their population is so low that they're advertising people to come and buy towns as long as they've got a plan to repopulate it. Right. The problem isn't overpopulation, it's underpopulation. And it's always been the Western countries that have been in drastic decline, even before the Second World War, they're in a drastic decline.
Yeah.
So the Kalergi plan, well, I don't believe it exists, because that would sort of indicate a human agency. No, what's happening is a natural occurrence. And that MEP that I mentioned, he said that our only choices are demographic collapse, or we import 100 million people. And that's what they've chosen, to import 100 million people. It's not a plan to exterminate white people. It's essentially a plan to breed a new batch of white people, because
We're running